Welcome to another episode of the Bug Bite, hosted by yours truly, Tech Coach Ralph. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the 2023 23 and Me data breach, which became 23, Me, and the hackers who gained access to our information. Well, not my information, because I don't believe I've ever signed up for 23 and Me, but let's find out more about what happened. Let's get into it. So this article is from tech.co, and the article is titled 23andMe claims it wasn't breached despite stolen data. The genetic testing company notes that hackers gained access to accounts through credential stuffing. What is credential stuffing? Let's so before we so to do this due diligence, right? Let's find out what credential stuffing is. So credential stuffing, and we're looking at the OWASP.org website. It says credential stuffing is the automated injection of stolen username and password pairs, credentials in the website login forms in order to fraudulently gain access to user accounts. Since many users will reuse the same password and username/email, when those credentials are exposed by a database breach or phishing attack, for example, submitting those sets of stolen credentials into dozens or hundreds of other websites can allow an attacker to compromise those accounts too. Credential stuffing is a subset of the brute force attack category. Brute forcing will attempt to try multiple passwords against one or multiple accounts, guessing a password, in other words. Credential stuffing typically refers to a specifically known breached username/password pair against other websites. All right, so I actually learned about this in a few different places, but I remember one of the recent places that I learned about this was in a course for full stack web development, and we were going through the sections about authentication, and we went through each level of password security and how to create strong and secure passwords, the different ways of implementing passwords on a site, making them more secure. So this is familiar where they would get access to a password in or username and password combination in a different location, and then they go and try it across like many different sites. And apparently, some people, these hackers, were able to access the 23andMe website with that kind of credential stuffing technique. So while they gained access to 23andMe, they could have gained access to pretty much any, and they probably did gain access to other websites that for these same users. So you have to be careful about how you set up your username and passwords. And I would also recommend like using the OAuth, where like you're using you're signing in through Google or Facebook or whatever, like through Apple. They do it too. Some Amazon is on some sites. But using those methods of authentication, and then a lot of times as well, those methods of authentication also include a two-factor authentication. So what's two-factor authentication? So when you go to log into into Google, for instance, right? A lot of times it'll send you a verification method onto your phone where it says, okay, you have to click on this particular number that matches what's on the screen versus what matches on the phone. So you might get like for 23 and me sake, you might get the number 23 that you have to tap on your phone, and then that gains access to the website that you're trying to access, right? Or in the same vein, you might need to use like Google Authenticator, where like for example, you've seen when we're logging into AWS and we have to go into Google Authenticator and enter in a code that matches for a given amount of time. So different ways of authenticating that keeps our information and access to our private data a lot safer, right? So consider that when you are creating accounts, try to avoid using the same passwords over and over. I would say try to avoid creating an account where you have to use a password in general. I prefer to like when I see sign in with Google or sign in with. Well, I don't use Facebook much, but to sign in with Google or sign in with whatever, I probably go with that instead of going through the whole process of entering my all my data and coming up with a username and a password. But some sites don't offer that, and when that happens, I just probably use the suggested Chrome password, and then it stores that in there. Now, the thing with that is you have to make sure that your Google account doesn't get hacked and your Chrome stuff doesn't get hacked. There's some good security measures around it, but I would definitely recommend that you be very, very careful with that. All right, but that's not necessarily what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about the 23andMe data breach. So let's get into it. So this article is written by Connor Cawley, and it was published on October 9th, 2023. So uh, by the time this video is being released, it will be about a little less than a month ago. All right, so 23andMe. Let's get into the article. It's arguably the worst possible companies to lose user data has confirmed just that, with 23andMe admitting that it was targeted by hackers. 23andMe houses some of the most sensitive user data on the internet. As a DNA testing company, you'll find more than just email addresses and phone numbers. This company stores data concerning your genetic information, which goes much deeper than your online credentials. So imagine that, like that type of data that they store, you're able to access it via via a website. And so while at the same time that users using the same username and password combination to access the site, you got to think as well, right? Okay, so being a company that that tracks its genetic information, DNA, and everything like that, you got to know that a lot of the users that you're going to get signing up, they're not the most technical or security centered people. Like, think about this, right? A a lot of technical people, for instance, they're not going to just get up and give their personal data that way, especially like when it comes to genetic information, DNA, and stuff like that. We barely want to give up our email address and phone number, because like just getting spam alone that gets annoying. But when you think about so you think about the type of people who would be signing up, and they might not be they're a lot of times they might be likely to reuse the same password, use the same email address, reuse the same username. So you got to keep in mind, like, all right, I need to protect my users, right? So in that fashion, I think that it would be useful to implement those two-factor authentications. Like one of the most basic ones is when you go and you log in and it sends you a text message that says enter the code that you got from the text message, which every time you do resend code, it will give you a different set of numbers that you have to put in. But something like with this level of data that's being stored and being shared, you would definitely want to have some type of additional measures of authentication. And it's a bit surprising that a company that manages this type of data didn't have this already, But let's keep going. It says now with stolen user data confirmed by 23andMe, the company is insisting it wasn't breached. So, how did the hackers get all that info? All right. So, 23andMe stole a user stolen data. Reported by Wired and confirmed by 23andMe, the DNA testing company did in fact have user data stolen from the platform. Even worse, the data is currently posted for sale on Breach Forum, with the hacker in question asking for $1 to $10 per account. That's interesting. I wonder how many accounts they breached for only asking $1 to $10. Like if it's a million, then that's $1 million. But yeah, so that's interesting. Interesting numbers. Says even worse than that, the data specifically targeted Ashkenazi Jews with over 1 million data points relating to those specific individuals. There was also data from hundreds of thousands of users from Chinese descent found in the sample data provided by the hackers. Okay. So now let's get into the nitty gritty. How did 23andMe user data get stolen? While the user data was stolen, 23andMe categorically denies that an actual data breach took place. So, how exactly did all this user data get stolen? Well, according to 23andMe, the hackers in question were able to guess the login credentials of users to gain access to their accounts. Then the hackers use the DNA relatives feature, which users can opt into for the purpose of sharing more data with friends and family to acquire even more information about the users. So here's the thing, right? Um, they can say that the they can say that the hackers were able to guess the login credentials, which we saw about the credential stuffing. That it's not technically guessing; it's getting the data from other. Like there was a breach that happened somewhere else, right? Whatever, like maybe it was a list of username and passwords. They did a database dump somehow, and the database wasn't securely encrypted for the password field. And now they get a combination of username and passwords. So, and let's even say that the username does not match the does not match the like let's say one site uses email address and then the other site uses username, right? But you can easily say, all right, let's try this list of usernames with the password and vice versa. And maybe one day I'll go into I'll do that part of the course where they're showing the different ways of that passwords when they're not done properly, how they can get you know hacked for lack of a better word, right? How they can get found out. So it's very important that we as users do our due diligence to make sure that we're using the proper password naming conventions and try not to have the same password or even a slight variation of that password going from site to site. Because let's say that you change it by two characters, it's not always that difficult to run an algorithm that would find out those that to find out those two characters and stuff like that. But on the other hand, from the company's perspective and from 23andMe's perspective in this case, that you should have fail safes in place that will prevent this. So, like, let's say, for instance, like they're doing many versions of the password, or they're like putting the username and then they're putting the email. There should be some type of locking mechanism based on maybe IP address, and how many times you get the password wrong, and you have to like say for the first time you get it wrong, you have to wait X amount of time, and you send an email to the username to the email on file to say, "Hey, they're trying to access um you've tried to access your email like 5 times incorrectly." Um, and as well, oh, you like when someone does log in, oh, you just logged in from this location. Please confirm that it was you. So many different options that you can do. And then there's also the two-factor authentication as well, where you can get a code or you can use an additional app. Some sites like some applications where like you have to scan a barcode or something. I don't know, whatever the case may be, right? So many different options that could be used to securely authenticate, which I say that companies have to take into account because users are like they might not be that knowledgeable on security, um, and then the ones that are, not going to they're probably not going to sign up for these type of applications in mass because because we build it, we know we know where the dead bodies lie to put it that way because and that's why we are skeptical of other developers like for instance I'd be willing to sign up for something that I created, but and I sign like depending on the company and stuff like that, but you have to be careful on the application that you sign up for because as we see with a lot, like every Friday on the Bug Bite, when we're seeing these data breaches, of whether it's a company who didn't securely update their servers in time, they delayed it for whatever the reason may be, or different ways that companies get hacked. We have to do our due diligence, and you know, a lot of times the public just doesn't do it. So we just got to be careful with that. All right, so let's keep going a little bit. So we were made aware that certain 23andMe customer profile information was compiled through access to individual 23andMe accounts. We believe that the threat actor may have then, in violation of our terms of service, accessed 23andMe accounts without authorization and obtained information from those accounts, says the 23andMe spokesperson. The process the hackers use to gain access to these accounts is called credential stuffing, which is a strategy in which data leaked from other breaches is used to gain access to other platforms. So that's what I was just saying, right? It wasn't that the passwords were guessed, it was that they took the data from another platform where there was a breach, and then they were able to use that able to use the combinations to access this 23andMe. So while it's not good that a breach happened on another location that affected 23andMe, it's still 23andMe's responsibility to lock down their systems to prevent this type of stuff from happening. You can't just have an open way of getting in. It's like you have a at your house or your apartment, wherever it is that you may live, right? And you have a flimsy one way, like one lock, right? One flimsy lock where you can have someone who quickly, a lock person who is able to use those little things that we see in the movies to get through it, right? There's no there's no real sense of security, right? Versus where you can have like I was watching this TV show the other day, and this lady had the regular lock, and then she had four different deadbolts. They had the little thing where you can turn to block the door from opening. They had a security sensor, and they had an alarm system, right? And they had video cameras. Um, so you have to like as a company, depending on the type of data that you're using, right? Like if I'm creating some kids game website, there's no the type of data that I'm storing matters, Um, so you have to take that into consideration, and you need to also know that it's not just about your website being secure because you don't know how other companies build their website. So if those websites are insecure, but like I was saying, like they're not storing insignificant data, or they're not storing significant data, then they might not have all those security measures in place. They might be more of a junior company that's just making, like, let's say they're just making some little kids games, right? And but they want to keep creating an account and everything like that. So now they have it, but theirs is not that secure because for them there's no sensitive data that they're storing. However, if their site gets breached, right? And now they have those credentials, and now they go across a bunch of different websites like 23andMe, and that same username and password was used. Now, Houston, we have a problem because based on some nonsense website that uses the same username and password, now you're able to access a website that has very, very sensitive information. And I think that that falls on the responsibility of that website with sensitive information to properly secure, right? Got to protect the fort, you know? So you have to properly secure the data because it's not on that other little rinky dink website's responsibility, right? Their level of encryption is for their needs, and your level of encryption has to be for your needs. You can't depend on another company, right? So that's my take on it, right? I think that users should create better, be more aware to secure their personal data online. At the same time, we as engineers, quality assurance, cybersecurity specialists, all of those, right? We need to protect people from themselves as well because it's what we do, right? We want to create amazing software, but at the same time, we want to make sure that people are secure and they're not getting violated. So that's my take on it, right? So let's finish this off, right? How to protect yourself online. The only reason strategies like credential stuffing works when it comes to stolen user data is because people reuse passwords so often. 23andMe reiterated in their statement that using unique, complicated passwords for your account and enabling features like two-factor authentication would stop this kind of threat. So just like I mentioned, right? So maybe they do have two-factor authentication, but maybe it's an opt-in feature instead of a required feature, right? So maybe they should consider making that required because I can understand some sites might not require the two-factor authentication based on what they do. However, with this level of data that's being shared, you might want to make it required. I don't know, right? I don't know all the details behind the decision that were made at 23andMe, but so like I was saying, on the people side, you have to be careful how often you reuse your passwords. But on the 23andMe side and the companies who handle data, you also want to sometimes you have to enforce these features for their own good, right? I've been to some sites before where I go to log in and they say, in order to continue, you have to enable the two-factor authentication, and some websites, they just introduce it on their own, right? So, I remember, with my bank, all of a sudden, I'd go to log in and it says, "Okay, you're gonna get a text message or an email, choose which one you want it to go to, and then you have to enter the code to keep going." And that was like they just enabled that, So I think that companies have to sometimes you just can't give the option. It's your company, it's your security, it's your liability. So sometimes you just don't give the options. That's how it is, right? Considering the average person has more than 100 passwords to keep track of, though it's safe to assume that kind of protection is hard to come by. Fortunately, password managers can help you manage this kind of security, coming up with complicated passwords and remembering them for you. If you want to learn more about how to protect yourself online, feel free to check out our online safety guide to see how you can avoid getting your data stolen. So I will put this link to tech.co where you can check out their online safety guide, and I'll put the link to this 23andMe data breach in the description, right? So you can read up on it on your own. I think this information is excellent for whatever you do in tech, right? Whether you're a software engineer, like when you are in your planning and story writing, you got to consider these type of breaches, so you can write proper user stories so you can protect your data and protect your customers, as well as if you're a Q engineer, you need to know these type of things can happen and how to, you can make suggestions for stories, your testing protocol. And if you are in cybersecurity, maybe penetration testing and stuff like that, then you can look at different ways that you can put your system under test to see, and you can also make suggestions like, okay, we see the security and stuff like that, but we should also implement a timeout for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then locked indefinitely, unless the user contacts us and they verify that they're trying to log in and they don't have their password and everything like that, right? So many things. So like there's something for everybody here, right? So I'll definitely recommend reading through the article yourself and checking out the online safety guide for your own personal protection. All right. So that's that for this week. Let's go back home. So that's that for this week, right? I hope you enjoyed the article, and I sincerely hope that you were not affected by this data breach. It seems like it was a bit targeted for some reason. Not sure why, but it is what it is. I hope that you weren't a victim of this data breach, and I hope that your information is secure. I hope your genetic information and your DNA information did not get out into the hands of the wrong people. But I also urge you to protect yourself at all costs. Do not let these companies who don't properly protect your data, like, don't become a victim to it. Protect yourself. Try to use different passwords. Try to use the one login where you're either going through Google or Facebook or Twitter. Sometimes I guess I don't know. Whatever the case is, right? Try to avoid having a bunch of passwords that you have to manage. If you do have to create a password, use some type of password manager. If you use Google Chrome, maybe use that one. If you use some third party one, whatever the case may be, right? But make sure your data is secure and that the passwords are different and complicated and not easy to access. Do something, but just don't enable two-factor authentication. Just don't make it easy. Like we had the other day when in one of our it's probably a bug bite, and we were talking about securing the fort. Make your account more difficult than the person next to you because they will be attacked first and you have time to get away. So that's that. Hope you enjoyed this episode of The Bug Bite, hosted by yours truly, Tech Coach Ralph. If you did, and even if you didn't, to be honest with you, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you can know that every time that we go live, so you can, and every time that we release content, so that you can continue getting this amazing, amazing information. But Until next time, this is Tech Coach Ralph signing off.
If you enjoyed the fascinating information shared in this video and you want more, be sure to hit the subscribe button to Tech Coach Ralph to be notified for new videos.